Good evening, everyone, and welcome to TriVersity Talk. I am Stephen Bloomer-Teague.
And I am Wendy Stewart Kaplan. Thank you for joining us on this, I hate to say it, wintry night. It's wintry, Stephen.
Yes, it is very wintry, and I mean, we had a lovely summer/fall, and here's hoping that the winter will be equally kind. But yes, it is a little blistery today.
So not being kind tonight. How now we're going through our week, Stephen. How has your week been so far?
It's been busy, but busy's good. I have to say, getting a new job, I have not been bored once, and which means that those hours pass away. I remember one day, like last week, I think it was, I was like, oh, geez, is it 10 o'clock already? And so
That's really cool. You know, when they say when you're really interested in something, right, the time just really zooms right past.
absolutely. And, and it seems like a lot of people are interested in our holiday party,
Yes.
so much so that we have hit capacity.
Have we hit capacity? I love that. Our holiday party, ladies and gentlemen, is an upfront exhibition space, and it's this Friday at 7 o'clock with a fabulous drag show at 8, and we plan on running to 11. So happy holidays.
Happy holidays. If you want to be on a happy holiday waiting list, you can just message info@triversitycenter.org. If people cancel, we'll do our best. We'll let you know. But I don't like turning people away, but it's also a good feeling that you have enough people that you can.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. And we're going to have, besides a great show, we're having some wonderful eats as well. I know, because my job is to pick up the food.
Hey, that's my dream job. So,
right. And if you haven't picked up your Christmas tree already, there are so many great places in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania to get a tree. And the cat's out of the bag. I actually bought my tree in Pennsylvania, a gorgeous tree, $30. You can't go wrong at that price. And I brought it back to the city on Metro North and then on the subway.
Nice.
And nobody will start up with you when you have a Christmas tree. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking it's a great way to travel around New York City.
I just always have a Christmas tree. I am all for it. Before we introduce tonight's guest, there's one more little plug I'd like to make. TriVersity is partnering with the Bradbury Sullivan Pride Center and Penny, which is the Pennsylvania Health Exchange, which is part of Obamacare. And we are having a representative from Bradbury Sullivan and Penny come to the center basically every week to answer questions, help you enroll. And we will be having Owen come back to the center on Thursday, December 16th from 3 to 5 p.m. So please come if you have questions. Hopefully nobody tries to come Thursday, because I put Thursday even though the date was clearly Tuesday this week. So there you go. But on Thursday the 16th, Owen will be back to answer your questions. So please, 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 if you have any questions about the health exchange in Pennsylvania or need help enrolling in getting a new policy, let us know. He's there to help, and that's what the center's for.
Fantastic, Stephen. And thank you for reminding everybody about that. Healthcare is a key thing. And isn't it great that TriVersity is involved with that?
Absolutely.
So, speaking of people that are doing great things and have done great things, tonight's guest is the first of 2 trans women in New York to be elected the Democratic district leader in the 30th AD in Queens, and in 1999 became the first transgender person elected to office in New York when she was elected a judicial delegate from the 60th Assembly District. I could go on and on about her dossier, and she's had some other interesting things that have happened. But you know what? Let me introduce Melissa Sklarz, and she'll tell you about it herself.
Hi, Wendy. Hi, Stephen. So great to see you tonight.
Well, it's so great to have you here, and thank you for joining us. Now, you're in New York City area, yes?
Yes, I live in Woodside in Queens. I call it Woodstoria. It's betwixt and between. It's north of Woodside. It's east of Astoria, Woodstoria.
I love it. I'm a Sunnyside boy, or at least I was for a little while there.
Yeah, so
Is
I'm
it
north of
Sunnyside
Northern Boulevard.
though? That's fantastic. We appreciate you joining us here tonight. TriVersity, of course, the name of the show was after our organization, TriVersity, the Pride Center, and we service New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. More of the upstate areas. So we always like people's perspectives from all over. So I'm just going to roll this out. Let's start with who you were as a child and how you became this incredible advocate.
Well, thank you for asking. So I was born in Manhattan, and I was born on 2nd Avenue and 15th Street. And the family moved out to Long Island, I guess, when my folks got pregnant for the 3rd time. So I was raised in Long Island. Sorry?
They needed more space.
Yes. Yeah, the 2-bedroom wasn't enough anymore. So I went out to Long Island, as many post-war families did. A lot of white veterans were able to get access to free education and very cheap housing. And so a lot of the World War II veterans did exactly that. And the suburbs of Long Island and Westchester and New Jersey were filled with veterans, including my family.
Well, I'm going to make you laugh, okay? I grew up in the Bronx, and we're close in age, okay? In my neighborhood, if you were doing well, you moved to Queens. Queens was a place where, I remember my mother saying, oh, they must be doing well. They just moved to Queens. There were 2 places, Queens and Co-op City, if you can imagine. I'm sure you know about Co-op City. So that's really funny. So many families, though, also moved to Long Island. And I guess, now how old were you when you moved to Long Island?
Oh, very, very young, under 5. And
Okay.
I grew up there, and we did, being part of the baby boom, we were always the pig and the python. There were millions of kids our age. Wherever you go, it was an army of little children, and of course, it's the only upbringing I ever really knew. So there was always a mob of us. Whatever we were doing, elementary school through high school, there was just millions of us, and I had funny feelings. I found myself, my perspective, wandering away from that of my fellow little kids, and I discovered that my gender identity was sort of different than the other kids. I very subtly asked questions and discovered no one else had those same kind of conflicts. I didn't really know what to do. There was no language. There was, this is the era of 3 television stations and not very little else, and the newspaper.
And shows like Donna Reed, My 3 Sons, right? We grew up with those shows. I think about that all the time, how that must have affected kids' gender identities, because that for so many of us was the norm. So how old were you when you started coming to realizations?
It's really hard to put a finger on it. I can tell you that when I was 10 years old, we used to get in my house the New York Times in the morning, and there was a story of a person who was arrested for impersonating a female. And they went into great detail over what this person was wearing and how they looked. And I was gobsmacked that, who is this? What is this? What is going on? And to discover that there were other people struggling with gender identity. Now, I can tell you that without getting too engrossed, this would have been the early 1960s. And so again, so it's after Christine Jorgensen, but before the Beatles arrived in New York City at JFK.
It's funny you mentioned Christine Jorgensen, because as a kid growing up in the Bronx, right, that was like the hugest deal in the world. If you remember what the headlines of the papers were like and everything, that was really, Christine Jorgensen was really the poster child
Well, she was certainly one of the first public, trans women who came out and was very public about it. And this, in 1953 America, this was the most profound, extraordinary thing anyone had ever heard. And what that did is opened the door to this idea, just like me with this person getting arrested in New York City, that there are other people sharing these same feelings and that there are solutions to these feelings. And certainly growing up in Nassau County in Long Island, I didn't really know this. I think Candy Darling of the Warhol factory grew up about 8 miles from, she was also from Long Island, but she figured it out much sooner than I did and really relocated into the city in the late 60s.
But go ahead, Stephen.
So, Melissa, how does it feel that your first real discovery that there are people like you also dealt with an arrest? I mean, that someone was publicly punished for what you saw as someone who identified or you identified with.
I love that. I thought that was so cool. I didn't really know where to get other information. And so I was one of those kids who decided I was going to go to the library. For all your viewers under the age of 40, a library is a building with books in it. You can go there and you can hang out and do whatever you want as long as it's legal. And so as a child, that's what I did. And I got to tell you, I probably tried to read every book in the library that I thought had anything to do with gender identity. Fiction, nonfiction, police stories, histories, anything. I went through the aisles of books and the stacks and tried to figure out, what is this? What does it mean? How do you deal with it? And how can I get more involved? And my family became concerned because I spent so much time in the library, and they began to not really believe that I was doing all that. But I learned a lot. A lot of textbooks were very helpful, and histories of the 19th century and things like that. I was voracious. I could not get enough information. And it really wasn't until I went to college, late 60s, early 70s, that I began to examine more of these feelings. I tried to really hide them. I just assumed I was probably crazy, and as I would get older, I would outgrow it. And not only did that not happen, but the feelings became more pronounced. And my solution for this was generally substance abuse. And I have some great lost years because of substance abuse, trying to navigate being desperate to be more female and feminine and to have a male existence. And again, this is, early 1970s. And the Warhol factory was profound. I know that we have a lot of our LGBT and trans histories. My icons were Holly Woodlawn and Candy Darling. I wanted to be Holly Woodlawn. I could never be as pretty as Candy Darling, but I could be as clever and funny as Holly Woodlawn. And so that was something that intrigued me.
There were three. There was Holly Woodlawn, Candy Darling,
and Jackie Curtis.
So I am, first of all, I knew those people. Okay. Number one. Number two, Jackie Curtis's nephew inherited the entire estate and all of the memorabilia and all of the plays. Jackie Curtis was brilliant. Yes. And I love, Melissa, that you brought this up, because the three of them, you just said it, Holly Woodlawn, the humor and everything, but the three of them, Stephen, do you know much about the Andy Warhol factory?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm one of those that are under 40 that don't even know what a library is.
Right. I so totally, and yet Stephen created one in our TriVersity Center library. So, but they were such incredible role models. And I have to share this with both of you. Even until this day, I actually got to do a stage reading of Jackie Curtis's Glamour, Glory, and Gold. I played a role in it. You know what that kind of, and you know from working with actors, Melissa, that is like absolute gold. What was so amazing about them is because as you just said, you suffer with depression. Why am I so different? Why am I this? Why am I that? There is substance abuse involved. And yet the three of them, you know, they come to New York and they become part. This is the thing. They became part of an accepted group. If you were one of the Warhol superstars, you were accepted. You know, you weren't trying to fit in anywhere. You could just be who and what you are. And when you're a person growing up like in Long Island or even, you know, Milford, Pennsylvania, or a suburb anywhere or a rural area, it is really, really hard, okay, to get that acceptance. I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but you mentioned, and I know so much about them, and I think as role models, they are such great role models for people that shows that, you know, belief in yourself and surrounding yourself with the right creative energy, it prevails. It absolutely prevails. So I didn't mean to cut off. So let's continue.
So, I mean, I started exploring personally my gender identity in the mid 70s, and I came back to New York probably about 1976, and I found that there were trans spaces in New York in those days. The first place I would go is a place called the Gilded Grape. It was on 8th Avenue and about 45th Street. At the same time as, I guess, Studio 54, mid 70s, disco era, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A lot of disco, and I went to the Gilded Grape, 1976. In some ways, I never really left, until my substance abuse made me homeless. But it was a profound awakening, and to see all these beautiful trans women was just amazing. And you know, I wanted to fit in. I wanted to fit in better. I didn't know what to do. They were all very glamorous and they were all very feminine. And I mean, I was a varsity athlete in high school. So to be able to navigate all that was difficult. And I didn't really know the right way to do it. And so more substance abuse. My solution to most things is substance abuse.
I mean, that's
yeah, come on.
Sadly, so often the case with
yeah, you know, there are no role models. There were no resources. There were no answers. Millions of questions and no answers. It's like I'm going to have another hit. So, but eventually, over time, I mean, from the Gilded Grape and to the Grapevine and to of the Barnum Room and all the Club 220.
Boiler Room, my God.
And just over and over. I mean, eventually I became a cocktail waitress in a place on 8th Avenue and 13th Street called Butterfields with Lady Kateria. So they would do all the shows, and I was hustling drinks. And
I love it.
God, it saved my apartment. So it just got to a point where the head-on crash of substance abuse and gender identity happened. I found myself homeless. I had a job. They eventually got rid of me, but they did let me go to rehab. And I went to rehab, and I said, my gender identity is confused. I don't feel male. I feel female. And they said, oh, we have no idea what you're talking about. And they sent me to the Gender Identity Project at the LGBT Center. This would have been late 80s, early 90s.
Oh my God. I remember the Gender Identity Project at the LGBTQ Center. It wasn't a Q then. It was LGBT.
Yeah, and Dr. Barbara Warren had started it, and she had a small group of trans women really, and eventually this idea just grew, and it became, you know, it was a place for people to come and create community and evaluate themselves, make friends, and all these things. And you know, my Melissa life started first in my little apartment on 14th Street, and then I would walk to 13th Street. And then we would go to the diner. All those diners are gone now. And then we would visit friends. The terror of getting on the subway for the first time, the terror of walking around on the streets during the daytime. Again, we're talking late 80s, early 90s. And
Melissa, I want to ask you, what was going on with your relationship with your family? Because at one point, as you indicated, you were a substance abuser and you were homeless, which, by the way, I don't have to tell you, not to generalize, is very typical. I hear those stories a lot. And so does Stephen. What was your relationship with your family at the time?
For them, would they want a drug addicted, self-destructive son or a clean and sober daughter? I don't know. My dad loved me always before he died. And I'm very close with my mom now. She lives in California. I put them through the ringer, Wendy. Any kind of conflict a young person could have in the second half of the 20th century, we put it on the table. And I was very close with my dad, and I'm still very close with my mom. And
this is great.
She's next month she'll be 96. I visited her last month in California, and they rolled with the punches. My dad was an educator. My mother was back in the era of housewives. She was a very well-read, very educated housewife. In today's New York, who knows what she could have done in the workplace. So
and you had siblings because you moved from the city to Long Island. So you had siblings.
Yes, I did.
And what was that like with the siblings at the time?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I did see my brother, I think, twice in 25 years before he died. Okay. And I'm in touch with my sister. She likes me.
Yeah. So there you go. And these personal stories. First of all, thank you for sharing, because it's great when other people can hear, oh my God, that happened to me. Okay, so I want to you start to clean yourself up, right?
Yeah. So I was so impressed with the Gender Identity Project, and so they put me to work. I was doing street outreach. You probably might remember what is the Gansevoort Special District and Business Improvement District was the Stroll. So all the girls used to work and sell themselves for money. The Stroll, anything from 8th Avenue to the river. And so we would go there, and this is before protease inhibitors and young trans people and gay guys were getting sick and dying of AIDS. And so we were trying to give out safe sex kits and all that. And then at one point there was a neighborhood forum about anti-transgender prostitution. And so at Gender Identity Project, they said, well, we're busy. You go see what's going on. And so I went and I listened. It was infuriating. Their anti-prostitution talk started becoming anti-trans talk. And so I stood up, and between all the elected officials and the residents and the police, and I read them to filth. But rather than get mad at me, they were sort of intrigued by, who is this person? So they got even with me and they put me on the community board.
And that's when a politician's born. I love it. I love it. I love it.
That's how it started.
Yes.
Okay, case in point, you opened your mouth. Okay, you had the spine to do it. Where did that come from? The
journey of sobriety, of getting sober, of the spiritual journey, about, and being part of a community, empowered me. Certainly I would meet people every day who were making extraordinary choices to live a life of their dreams. And I wanted to do that too. I thought that I had ruined everything, that I was too messed up, too broken to ever have a life that would have any meaning. And so to find myself at this point, to be able to get a new chance, a new beginning, a new start, I was intrigued. So I in time became somewhat fearless. I had a roof over my head, which I was happy about. My cocktail waitress gig at Butterfield's on 8th Avenue at least saved my apartment until I was able to find more permanent work. And, you know, I wanted to make it work. And so it happened. It's, you know, I never thought I would be able to be Melissa. I never thought I would be able to transition. And once I did that, I wanted to make sure that, you know, there's a fork in the road. Do you want excitement or stability? And it's like, me, I vote for stability. And I had already been through the wars. And so I figured that this would be important, not only for me, but perhaps for others.
Well, your story is such a story about giving back. It really is. And when you tell your story like this, because you had hit rock bottom. That's a saying in AA, as you know about hitting the rock bottom, but you hit rock bottom on every level. And then for you to, I know a lot of people that didn't make it. I will just say that. And so do you, I'm sure. But there is something that burns inside somebody that is able to turn their life around to that degree. Because which came first, the chicken or the egg? I always say this, you know, the gender identity question or the substance abuse, you know, and they go hand in hand.
I mean, in the 70s and 80s, you know, the dream was the husband and the white picket fence in the house. But the idea of being an out trans woman was brand new. And I thought they were crazy. It's like, I'm not going to tell anyone. That's crazy. Just look at all the danger. And they said, no, you don't understand. You know, there's a women's movement. There's a civil rights movement. There's the gay movement. We're going to create a trans movement. And I said, you're out of your mind. And yet it took me a couple of years to figure that not only might this work, but there might be a way for me to use my voice and help make this happen.
So I find it so interesting that you talk about that in a world of excitement versus stability, you choose stability, and that you then engage in politics, which I would say is probably one of the least stable fields that there could possibly be. How do you make that work? How do you keep that balance?
Well, I mean, eventually what I had to do is get a job. I you know, little old for sex work. So I had to find work. So I did a lot of things. I worked for Gay Games in '94. I worked for GMHC. I was a receptionist at GMHC in the volunteer department, I guess, in '96. And then I was promoted to administrative assistant in '97.
GMHC, good for you, right?
And then I was able to work part-time at a credit union in Times Square. And when they realized that I like numbers, I went from part-time to full-time to manager, so director. So as a child, it was never my dream to be a debt collector, but that's sort of what happened. You know, politely, I helped actors with their finances. And I liked it. I liked going to work every day. I liked getting a paycheck.
Sure.
I liked going home, and I liked the work. I liked the people. And so that's the stability, Stephen, really the idea of Monday mornings, I enjoyed them. And I would open up and see what is on the schedule today. Who are we going to talk to today? And actors are wonderfully talented, creative artists, but a lot of them are very bad with numbers. Good with scripts, bad with numbers. So I help them with that. Some we know, some we don't know.
Right. It's amazing that not only working with the LGBTQ Center on 13th Street, but in terms of what you end up doing with your real job, which really didn't have anything to do with helping transgender, although there could have been actors that were, but now you're working with numbers, but you're helping actors.
To be hired as an out trans woman, their management team was mostly straight with some gay guys, but to get hired as an out trans woman in the 1990s was pretty cool.
Right.
Again, it was when I started my transition. It's like, how in God's name am I going to keep a roof over my head? And a lot of temp jobs. So, 7 years after the fact, to finally start to get a permanent full-time job at the credit union uh,
Amazing.
was a great, great, great relief. And so I made that work. I stayed with them for many years,
Sure.
uh, just in order to have, as I pointed out, some stability. And what it did is I found the work so simple, it freed up my time to help create community and advocate with policy for
I
trans
know,
New York.
Steve. Wow. Amazing. So, you actually started transitioning what year? I'm trying to put a timeline together of what was going on
I
in the world at
figured
that time.
90, maybe 91. I think
Yeah.
not so. Yeah, I started physical transition in 91.
I
Yeah, so
remember
it's been
what
now
they
30
were,
years. So if
well,
you consider being an adult at 16, so I've been Melissa as an adult for more than half my adult life.
well, you know what? Bless you that you were able to do that in the 90s. We at TriVersity, we meet people of every age group. And the age group that I have found in particular in our area, it's tough over 50. Okay, it's tough over 50 when that life you were talking about with the white picket fence and the house and the maybe the two kids or whatever, and maybe you have a blue collar job and then you're transitioning. And that was for me a whole group that I've met out in Pennsylvania and New York State and continue to meet. I don't know what those people were doing in the 90s. I say to myself, were there those people that were in their 50s that wanted to transition, right? When we go back to like 1990, but there really wasn't. If you had kids and a wife and all of that, it was really hard for you to do then. And then you compare it to now when there are avenues for people to quote unquote, as we say, live your truth. It's just interesting. You transitioned at a time or started your transition when they were just getting the cocktails out for AIDS. It was a really crazy time in the LGBTQ community for people of a certain age group too. I have friends that were in their 20s in the 90s. It was very different for them coming to New York then. I came in the 70s. So by the time we rolled into the 90s, I had been through the AIDS era. I did know a few people that transitioned early on, but not a ton, because a lot of the people that were transgender, as you said, they worked the streets. That's what they did. And the awful term that we call it awful now, but I remember tranny. That's the word that you heard. I would go out at night, and there was a place in the village right by the Monster that sold pizza. They nicknamed it Tranny Pizza because the girls that worked the streets hung out at Tranny Pizza when they were done. But I remember being in there one night. I had maybe someone spiked my drink or something, either at the Monster or some club down there. And I was in Tranny Pizza, sick as a dog. Do you know those girls not only came over, got me Coca-Cola, put their arms around me, helped me into a cab, made sure I had a cab, and asked me if I had money to get home with. Okay. I'll never forget that as long as I live. I've always been a big advocate. But again, the people I knew weren't the people that worked the streets. It's a whole
My experience being a cocktail waitress in that part of town, they were kids. They were kids. They ranged between the ages of 15 to 25, as far as I can tell. And when it's December and it's 1 a.m. and it's sleeting out, and they come in with enough to have a beer or a soda and sit for an hour and to be with their friends and to watch the street hardness disappear from their face just to be inside and safe. And all of a sudden, oh my God, she's not 30, she's 18, and you could see it. And, to witness that part of New York at the time, is very, very special. The we have all learned as our LGBTQ community, how important it is to make sure that young people are protected so that they get to be old people. And we're working in that direction, both at the city and state level. Now, we've been able to educate our elected officials and our policy people that if you're really interested in making things better for people, here is a part of our community that has no resources and very little hope. It's really important. The only hope that comes is from community, and you can help. Last year, the city council came up with $3.5 million specifically for trans equity alone. The group, 5 or 6 different organizations, trans run, 3.5 million. So to talk about what I saw in 1995 versus what we're seeing today, 25 years later, is a miracle.
And you played such a role in that. In the late 90s, you made a little bit of history, right?
Well, people, so my city councilman was a gentleman by the name of Tom Dwayne. His chief of staff was a gal named Christine Quinn. They ran, we have Village Independent Democrats, and they had their own political group. And they says, okay, we're going to have neighborhood elections, Democratic elections. We would like to add you to our team. There's never really been anyone like you before. And I said, okay, I don't know what it means. They said, yeah, we're going to run you. We're going to pick judges, and we want to make sure that we have the delegates at the convention. You'll be a judicial delegate. And I said, okay, I had no idea what they were talking about. Yeah, it'll be great. We'll create a campaign as a transgender woman. I go, whoa. Wait a minute. I don't want that. No, it'll be great. No one knew. So there were 33 people running for 11 slots. I must have come in around 6th place. The New York Times got a half-page coverage. It's such a tiny little Democratic post in the neighborhood. Got a half-page coverage in the New York Times. Wow. It was so unusual in 1990. You'll have to, before Twitter and Facebook. Does it happen if it's not on Twitter and Facebook? It does happen. But I was on the Out 100 in the year 2000 for taking this little step on behalf of our community.
That's incredible.
It really is quite incredible.
I hope you have a good scrapbook.
Really? At any point, Melissa, did you feel like they were trying to make you the poster girl?
The important thing, Wendy, is it's okay to be the first. The key is not to be the last. I was able to embrace that. And then once I was able to get access and to try to figure out, well, who is our community and what is needed? And I want to be as polite as possible. After about 5 or 6 years, the white people sort of like moved on. And so it was important that our communities of color really are the ones that had a lot of need. So I wanted to work very hard to create access for Black and brown trans women mostly. And I did that. And so whenever I got my foot in the door, and I would make sure others were included, it was mostly Black and brown trans women. And now today, those young people are now our great New York trans women and men leaders.
Absolutely. I don't know if did you go to the transgender, the queer march this year for Pride or last year? Because we didn't have what used to be the official one.
I went to Reclaim Pride this year. And of course, someone in my group had COVID. I have health issues. I'm older. So, this was the year of COVID. I wanted to be careful, but I did go to Reclaim in June 2020. A lot of people. I enjoyed it a lot. I did about half the march. We all gathered in Bryan Square. It was great. I generally march every year. My marching route seems to get shorter and shorter as time goes on.
As time goes on, your route gets shorter and shorter.
Now, Melissa, I have a question that's kind of out of the blue, but just something I'm generally curious about. As former president of the Stonewall Democrats, What do you think of log cabin Republicans?
What do I think of?
Log cabin Republicans.
That's a good question, Stephen.
Um, I can think of log cabin Republicans in the 90s and the zeros and today. And, they were hopeful. We started, Barney Frank started National Stonewall Democrats as a counterpoint to log cabin Republicans because they were the only national gay organization doing national policy work. And so once Barney was forced out of the closet, he was the impetus to start National Stonewall Democrats. So my local LGBT club sent me to be the representative, and eventually I became the board co-chair. And it's hard to take them seriously. I still follow them. The current concept of the Republicans frighten me. They seem to have given up on democracy, and that includes log cabin Republicans. They think this our past president has all the answers, and the log cabin people are very excited and enthusiastic supporters of him. I don't really see, well, here in New York, we assumed our new cohort of LGBT city council people were 6 elected officials. We are wrong. There are 7. There's now a gay Republican out of Staten Island named David Carr. And so we now have a gay Republican in the city council starting on January 1st. So I'm a member of a nonprofit group called Equality New York. And I said, let's reach out to David Carr. We're nonpartisan. Let's talk to him. Let's see what he's willing to do on behalf of our community.
And have you had that talk with him yet?
No, not yet. Not yet. I will find out more tomorrow.
Total cliffhanger.
It's really important to build community, and building community takes all sorts of people. And I'm a Big Ten kind of gal. Being the president of Stonewall when I was for 2 years, it's amazing how many people agreed with things and how many did not. And
Right.
The idea was to make sure that people have their voices heard, that they'll be taken seriously. And in the end, democracy is important. Now we see Group Working Family Party, we see the Democratic Socialists of America, we have the Democrats. So, and 2022 is going to be an extraordinary political year in New York. Who is going to be our governor? We saw a new city council and a mayor this year. Lots of people, lots of voices. Politics in the 21st century is extraordinary. At least in New York, people are getting more access to the political system is always better.
And you hit the nail on the head, and you said at least in New York. But when you think of the other places in the country, we just had Transgender Day of Remembrance. And Stephen, what is the number? 50? Simone is so great at this, our vice president who's transgender. She's great with numbers. 53 trans women have been killed since November.
It's hard. It depends on what you're using as kind of the benchmark for what you're serving. But I mean, it could be even higher depending on what you're using as your benchmarks. But I mean, whether it was like 45 to 55 or higher, it was the highest number recorded that.
So in one area, like in the New York area, New York City, even up to Albany, things are getting unbelievably better. You're right, from the 90s to now. But what do you think the answer is for the rest of the country? I mean, all those anti-trans bills that have been introduced. Your opinion, first of all, you're a really good diplomat and politician. You should run for governor. I like your answer, and I like the fact that you constantly put community first. What do you think the answer is for the rest of the country?
I think that the biggest danger for transgender women in America is poverty, is racism, is lack of educational opportunities. lack of adequate health care. And it's not just trans women, it's not just trans women of color. West of the Hudson, it's most people, where these states that are going to war against their own citizens, and at the bottom of every totem pole is always going to be trans women and trans women of color. And the risks that this part of our community goes through to keep a roof over their head and food in their stomach makes extraordinary risks where they put themselves in terrible, terrible danger, whether it's sex work or just making choices that are unimaginable. It's racism, it's poverty. Here in New York, it's whenever we have problems with trans community, it's still racism, lack of education opportunities, lack of health care, lack of housing. This is universal. It's not transphobia. I have a home. I was able to get education. What I want to be able to do is work as hard as I can, and not just for white trans people, but also people of color. Whenever we have a victory, it seems like the white people get all the rewards and not the people of color.
Well, yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head.
In pretty much every movement. I mean, it just always, you're right.
How do you get your point across and accepted, I guess, out there? We've had some pretty incredible transgender activists on this show, and a lot of what they said, and I know where it's coming from, and I hear them, but I could see how that kind of talk would be antagonistic when you're trying to win over rights and get support. So how do you do that? What's the way you navigate those channels?
I think what we're seeing west of the Hudson is that these reactionary forces are starting in on the weakest community in America, which would be trans women and trans women of color. And so this is practice. What they're doing is they're taking reactionary stances and practicing on trans people and trans people of color. But once they succeed there, then they'll go after gays and lesbians. Then they're going to go after Black and brown people. Then they're going to go after seniors and youth. As much as they can unempower these different diverse communities, they are working on it. It's amazing how when they talk about the original intent of the Constitution, there's a little voice that says white men, and anyone that's not white men seems to be on the plate. If you're not really at the table, then you're on the menu. And we have seen these reactionary forces that are putting so much effort and energy. So they're just using trans people as a practice. It's like the minor leagues. For your listeners, minor leagues is a sports term. It would be like ballet, but not Lincoln Center. It's not the major league. So, and we're seeing that they're not going to stop with trans youth in sports. That's only a starting point. They will take it as far as they can, and over these next few years, as they continue to show their disregard for what is democracy, we'll see how many wars and battles they're willing to fight. Let's see what happens to marriage equality in the United States. Let's see about religious freedom for all Americans and not just Christian Americans. All of these reactionary ideas are on the table, and we will find out very shortly with our new reactionary Supreme Court how much will work and how much will not.
I mean, I've heard people talk at, I sat on some lectures from virtual panels, since that's all you have anymore, about, we don't think that the Supreme Court would overturn Obergefell v. Hodges, but they're just going to slowly erode all the rights away. And I'm like, oh, okay. But the more I think about it, I'm like, I think they'd be perfectly willing. There are several justices that would overturn that decision in a flat second. With the Supreme Court, I don't know what's happening next. It looks like Roe v. Wade's screwed.
And after that will come gun rights, and then after that will come marriage equality.
Right. So how do you keep your eye on the prize, so to speak? I mean, you have a very optimistic approach based on your career and how you're dealing. How do you keep fighting for rights with all of this going on? What makes you get up and makes you think that you can make a better world?
At this point, Wendy, I'm really at wit's end. You know, I've stopped watching Rachel Maddow. It just terrifies me. I don't have the weapons to fight for the next war. And you know, the people in their 30s and 40s and 50s are going to be our warriors against this wave of reaction that we are seeing all over the nation, other than the blue places like New York and California. You know, my generation is no longer in charge. I know a lot of people are going, finally, right? You know, to think that Clinton, George Bush, and Donald Trump are my generation. Great.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and it's terrifying, and I am terrified. And the idea that democracy is better than fascism is going to be on the table, and we will have to see. I don't know what comes next. Every election, every presidential election, me and a couple of friends, we take a look at the map and we travel and we go to places and knock on doors. The last 4 presidential elections, I've been to Ohio, I've been to Pennsylvania, I've been to North Carolina, I've been to Virginia. I cannot tell you how honored I was to think that for 100 years, the white people made sure that Black people in North Carolina didn't vote. And I spent a week knocking on doors of Black residents in North Carolina promoting Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was an honor and a privilege to make sure that I am here. I am here for us. I want to make sure that you know about the election and you come. We had great success in Ohio and Virginia, and I was very disappointed at North Carolina. My optimism is waning. You know, I look to people, the new leaders, our new political leaders, you know, what can they do? And then what can I do to support them?
Well, you said, you know, you might be the first, but you wanted to work to make sure you weren't the last. And yes, I mean, I get down, I mean, about the state of the world today, but you passed the torch and you've done what you needed to do, and you're still out there and you're still being active. And even by coming on a show like this and expressing these opinions that maybe somebody can take something from and it inspires them to push forward. I mean, you've done great work, and I think you're still doing great work.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I've been appointed to the Mayor Adams transition team, so I'm on the equity committee, and of the 16 of us, 13 are people of color. So I'm one of a very small cohort of white people on the equity committee. So I'm ready to roll up my sleeves, have this conversation. What can we do to empower as many New Yorkers as possible with our new mayor, Eric Adams?
So you're still doing it. Okay. I want to get you a t-shirt that says I'm not done yet. All right. You're still doing it. All right. You're still a mouthpiece. You can still get out there and do it. And in terms of passing the torch, I'm all for that. You're right, the 30 and 40-year-olds. But you know what? You've got the experience. You've been in it to win it, and you're doing it. All right. And that is really something. You're also working with SAGE, Senior Action in a Gay Environment. All right. We need to encompass our seniors.
Well, as you people may or may not know, there are 3.2 million New Yorkers over the age of 65. And, you know, you figure 8% of those are LGBTQ. So over 200,000 New Yorkers are over the age of 65. And that's profound. And, you know, when I was working at SAGE, how many people in New York State are advocating for this gigantic LGBT elder community? It was mostly me. And of course, AARP, we were able to partner with them. So I'm not there with them now. I left SAGE in July, but hopefully they will continue to work, because if we're lucky, we will all get to be older. And if we're really lucky, we will all get to be over 65. And we want to make sure that the city and state government and the people in charge of equity understand that older LGBT people need a place to live, need health care, need
Right.
access to resources.
Absolutely. Well, Melissa, this has been so wonderful.
Whoa.
We have come to the end of our show, but before we close, we always like to leave the floor to our guests to give any plugs, give some last words of inspiration, whatever you want to do with the floor. It is all yours.
As if I haven't been talking about myself enough.
We want more.
Yeah, the answer is not really. I right now I left Sage. I'm in contact with the governor and the mayor and others. I think it's really important. It's a new year, and what I want people to do is not get discouraged. 2022. We have a new city council. We're going to have a new mayor, and we're going to have a new state government that we're going to elect in 2022. And I'm sure that all three of us want to be engaged and make sure that the best people are in power.
Right.
Sorry. And to make sure that all of our communities are taken care of.
Yes.
And so that's what I want. If they don't like Stonewall Democrats, then get involved in Working Family Party or get involved in DSA as long as you're involved.
Agreed. Right?
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for being part of this, and thank you to everyone who's watching tonight or who will be watching rather.
Oh, and I get to take my picture. I always do this at the end. Cheese. One more. Great.
Happy holidays, Wendy and Stephen, and to you and all your listeners and viewers.
And happy holidays to you, and good night, everyone. See you
next
next week.